Unlearning Unlimited. Wait. Unlearning Unlimited. Yeah. Hey.
Hello, welcome to the podcast. My name is Dr. Sito Narcisse, and welcome to Unlearn and Unlimited. We're super excited today for today's podcast, which is called The Courage to Unlearn. We have Ms. Kerry Cerra with us, which I'll be introducing shortly. But first, let me just bring on our guest co-host, Tatiana Escheverria. Escheverria, who's co-hosting with us today. Helping me out in a couple of episodes, doing some cool stuff. So super excited. She's joining us, educator like many of us, teacher, administrator, all that good stuff. As you guys know, my name is Dr. Sito Narcisse, and we have this podcast is around what we call Unlearned Unlimited. And what we talk a lot about is what are the things that people should be thinking about, what they should not be learning. So we call it Unlearn. And then what they should be unlimited about. What are the possibilities? And we bring on different type of folks, great folks, whether authors, educators, folks all over to come and talk about their experiences and what are some ways to contribute in the work, which we think is really cool, you know?
Awesome.
So today I'm super, super excited because we have with us Kerry Cerra, who's joining us. She is an author. Also, she has been in school systems and talked about a lot about the great work. I'm going to let her talk about her book and a lot of things. But we're just super excited. She's taking time out of her busy schedule to come and join us. You know, like we always say in our work in our podcast is about talking about what our truth is and how this thing works out. So, you know, we always want to be unfiltered. Am I right, Tatiana?
That is right.
Yeah, we know none of the fluff. We want to hear what really goes on. And then also from there, we pivot into like, what are the solutions and possibilities, right? Because I think what makes it important that we're talking to people about what are the things that really help impact, whether it's children, educators in the field, or communities and families, or just societal things in general that really helps to kind of move the work in this educational space. And so without further ado, Carrie, how are you? Can you hear us?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me.
No,
So excited.
Super excited. You know, we did a lot of homework on you.
I sure did. I told him, I was like, I am super.
Oh, I can go then. Bye. No, I'm kidding.
No. We need to hear it from the real deal. I told him I was very excited about chatting with you and your background, specifically as your work as a media specialist and considering the pulse around books these days.
That's a really polite way to put it, the pulse.
You know, the polite way to put it. But I have some other things I want us to chat about, also about you like the Eagles, and I'm a Cowboys fan. So there's also that. So, you know, so I think we're going to get along great. But
yeah, I won't get so upset about that comment right now, but you know.
Let's talk a little bit about you. We can share your bio, but it's much better
to hear from you directly.
Delivered by you. So tell us a little bit about you.
Okay. Well, my name's Carrie. I was a social studies teacher for many years at the high school level. I ended up leaving because I am deaf, and I knew that in that space, particularly social studies, it's important to not just like be lecturing to kids, you know, dates and facts and that stuff, and really talk organically about, ironically, history, right? Like, how do we prevent certain things from happening again? And what we're living right now is interesting, right? Because this is how I spent all those years talking in those spaces with kids. And it got to the point where I couldn't talk. I could not have those conversations, and I didn't want to be the teacher. I never had a social studies teacher that lectured. It was always interactive, and I knew that that's what I wanted to be, and I couldn't be anymore. So it was a difficult decision to walk away, but everything for a reason. I firmly believe that, because that's when I started writing books. I had always loved reading, but I never dreamed I could be an author. I didn't know I could be an author. So I'm pretty passionate in that spectrum as well. Like, as a media specialist, which I later became in high school, making sure we were bringing authors in, making sure kids understand that your career path can be anything, and you're not limited. So Yeah, I've kind of been all over the board with my professional life anyway. But when I decided to become an author, and you hope you're going to get published, you don't know if it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It was many years of hard work, lots of rejection, and even space between my first book and my second book, and you wonder, am I ever going to do this again? So it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. And it doesn't matter how many awards you win. I think most authors would agree there's always that tremendous self-doubt. Is my book going to reach the right person? Is it going to make a difference?
Well,
Is it going to sell well?
Well, to kick us off, we always ask these same questions when we start off. What is the thing that you would say that folks should unlearn? Like you talked about your experience and your resiliency. Like, what, because, we learn a lot of stuff in schools or our upbringing, right? Our socialization. And so the question is like, and we also know like some of the stuff we learn does not really apply to the real world sometimes. So like, what would you say? Like, you've had a lot of success. You've done these great things. Like, what's the main thing you'd say, hey, you wish you could unlearn to be able to like put you on the right path, that what you know now versus what you didn't know before?
I would say probably that it's okay. I wish we could unlearn that people like me with a disability aren't deserving of space, that we shouldn't be taking up space. And I wish that could be unlearned. I wish when I was diagnosed at 16 with, I knew it was progressive. I knew my loss was, I would eventually be deaf, and I am. I felt so small for so long, and I felt that I didn't deserve that space. And I wish that people could unlearn that, because it's not true.
Right.
Your worth isn't really determined by awards or perfection or what you can accomplish. Honestly, we all deserve to be here. We all deserve space, and particularly that there's enough space for everyone.
That's right.
Right? Like me
That's right.
taking up space
That is so
doesn't
good.
take away from someone else's space. There's plenty of room at the table. So, pull up a chair. That's kind of my philosophy. And I wish that we could unlearn that.
Well, it's interesting. Like I would argue that people like us are, we have this sense of like tenacity of resiliency, right? And like,
Are you referring to us as educators, or just in general?
Just in general. I mean, you think about when you look at people who have been able to overcome and achieve certain things, there's something inside you that's helped you drive you where you are today, right?
Yes.
And I always just say, I wish it was something I knew like earlier, because I wouldn't have to go through all this pain I went through. So like, when we started to think about like Unlearn Unlimited, those type of things with this podcast and stuff, we kept saying like, why don't we just like get folks who've gone through some stuff or like have done some amazing things, talk about like, here's some things like, listen, like, don't let this impact you. Like, this is like the real world, what it looks like. Right. And I think like, that's why, for us, it's like, what are the things we can kind of uplift? I mean, you've done some amazing things. When you look at it, I mean, when, we're reading the stuff, and
about your books.
Yeah. Tatiana was like, yo, she's like, really like a bomb. I was like, yeah.
I think it's interesting. I always laugh. I think there's educators that do big kids and there's educators that do little kids. And when I was reading about you initially, you were studying elementary education, but then you pivoted from that. I am pro little kids. I think that is my arena. So I thought that was awesome. And then I read into, your books and how you had an SSYRA book. And my days in the classroom, our kids were crazy about SSYRA books because we had SSYRA book challenges. But I want to go back to what you shared about unlearning, and how you wish that the part about holding space, right? And that people understand that individuals that have any particular challenge that they can also take up space and it doesn't take away from their space. What led you, was that specifically what led you to center on the characters in your books? Because you infuse characters that are deaf in your books that you write. So is that what led you into that space?
Definitely. But I will say it took me time. So when I was 16 and diagnosed, and growing up in the 80s, when you have a disability, back then you were labeled retarded. And those kids went to special schools, right? And I was so scared that that was going to be me. So I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my best friends. I didn't tell anyone.
Wow.
And even as I aged, I go into the classroom and I didn't tell my students, I didn't tell my fellow teachers, because again, it was just not something that was talked about. And with mine being hearing loss, we call that an invisible disability. It was easier for me to let people believe that I was either dumb because I was answering their questions wrong, like what I thought they were asking me and it wasn't what they were asking, or that I was mean because I just didn't hear them asking me anything at all, and so I'm ignoring them. And believe it or not, that was actually easier to let people believe that than to fess up that I just can't hear you. And I really hate that for myself looking back. And even in 2014, when my first book came out, there is no deaf character in that book. And I was not still as an adult ready to talk about that. I just wasn't. And it's such a shame, because I wonder if there had been books, because I was an avid reader. I never saw books with a character like me. And would that have changed anything for me? I can't say for sure, but I think that it's a shame that it wasn't available. And I do think publishing is doing a lot better now there's a whole push for, we need diverse books. And that movement started around 2014 when my first book came out. And I was so fortunate for that, but I still wasn't brave enough to talk about that myself. And so my first book does not have that at all. And I wrote another book in between, and nothing felt authentic. And I was reading another book actually called El Defo, and that I reached out to that author who was also deaf. And I was like, wow, thank you for this. And, she kind of made space for me. Right. And I would love to be able to pay that forward, because I don't know if I hadn't read that book, if I hadn't read it, she hadn't written it, would I have ever been able to tell my story? I don't know. But it was definitely an open door for me to walk through. And I will always be grateful for that. So I started writing my second book that was published, Hear Me. And it is all about a girl who is dealing with a very sudden loss of hearing, and much quicker than mine was. And her parents are trying to force her to get cochlear implants, and she doesn't want it. So it's also about, like, at what age do you have the right to speak up for what you want for yourself? And, she says, well, I'm the one with the hearing loss, but you are the ones not listening. Like, why does my opinion matter? And she just wants to be heard. And she feels broken, because I felt broken for so long, and it makes me emotional. But she kind of realizes by the end of the book that my ears are broken, but I'm not broken. And it took me a long time to get there. So now I'm on a mission to write characters, even if it isn't the theme of the book. My last book that just came out last fall is Make a Little Wave, all about activism and shark conservation. And, what does it mean to be an activist? But my character just happens to be deaf. And it isn't the storyline. And I don't know that I'll ever do a full on, well, I guess that's not true, because I have 2 more maybe coming out that deal definitely with that. But I just want kids to be able to pick up books and see people like them, right? And I just don't think there's enough of that yet. But we're doing better. Authors are doing better to get those books out there.
So beautiful.
So Carrie, like, what's the thing, like, as you listen to your story and how you talk about, you can tell that you've written some of the characters that you had in your book, you've identified with your own emotions and your own, experiences in that place. What gave you the courage to kind of say, hey, I'm going to, like, take a step and make my voice heard, or I'm not going to conform, I guess probably is the better word, to what society or what the educational process has been, right? To get me where I am today. I mean, because, we talk a lot about this whole unlearning, right? So this whole episode is around the courage to kind of unlearn some of these things so you could take these steps forward. What was those things, would you say, one, that made a tremendous impact on you, and number two, you know, allow you to step forward the way you are today?
I think it comes down to finding safe space. In my writing group, I felt safe enough to fess up to that. In my home, I was obviously comfortable with telling my kids. They apologize now that they read Hear Me. My middle child, Josh, actually wrote me this super long. I don't know. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Goodreads, but it's a site where you can go and review books. And he sent me a link. One day I was at work. I had gone back to work at a school, even with my hearing loss, as a media specialist many years later. And it was right before Hear Me was coming out. And he sends me this link with, to Goodreads. And I thought he was just letting me know that the book was listed because it hadn't come out yet. But we share a Dropbox, and he apparently read the manuscript and wrote me this whole, the whole beginning of the review is an apology, basically. So even though my space at home was safe, he was admitting, we didn't always make an effort, even though we knew. So it wasn't until it was in writing for him that it clicked.
Yeah.
And that's not even to say they were bad. I mean, they were kids, right?
Right.
So
And
you
how
don't
old was he when he gave you that?
take it. But I think finding space and knowing that it's okay. I feel like I was doing it little bits at a time, telling this group or telling that group. And even some of my high school friends now, they're like, why didn't you tell us? Like, I wish I knew, but I wasn't brave enough. I didn't feel that I deserved that space back then. And so just a little bit of time watching other authors be brave, and then connecting with the readers, the ones when I do my school visits. Speaking to kids is my absolute favorite thing to do, whether it's about my books or my journey or whatever. But being able to connect with the kid that usually hangs back at the end when everybody's lining up to go, and they just want to tell you because, oh my gosh, I have a hearing loss too, and I've never told my friends, and I mean, it makes it worth it. But it was, when I wrote Hear Me, it was going to be just for me, just therapeutic. I didn't think I would even send it to my agent. It would just be for me, right? And then going to the doctor, University of Miami, to write this scene correctly. Well, now I have to get an appointment to figure out what is my character going to go through when she goes to this appointment. And so going down there and making that appointment, having that, information given to me, and knowing in my head, I'm never going to get an implant. Like, that's not for me in real life. And yet agreeing with my character here. And then getting the implant, which has honestly changed my life. So I don't know that it's one thing, but I think it starts with feeling safe in smaller spaces until you're just ready to embrace it. And the more I was reaching kids, or surprisingly, a lot of comments, not from people who were hard of hearing, but people who live with someone who is either deaf or, and them saying, oh my gosh, thank you for this, because I didn't really get it. And so I think once you start to realize your book is making a difference, it made me feel more brave. I still get choked up, obviously, but I'm definitely braver than I was.
I was just thinking, like, I wonder, like, is your son, right? They gave you the apology letter. I was just thinking, like, how, I would feel so bad, like, I'm like, Mom, I missed this whole. I was thinking, like, what that experience is like, because we want to always make sure our mom and dad, like, our parents, keep us safe, but we also want them to feel safe. Even though they're also our discipliners at the same time. So.
It was the most beautiful thing. Honestly, I was at work, and my high school Battle of the Books team, which I was always so proud of them. We had just come back from our competition, won second place. I was already on this high, and then I get that, and I'm literally standing in the middle of my media center, like sobbing after the first two lines of his review, and I'm like, I'll be in my office, and I go back there and read the whole thing, and I'm surprised it's still there, because a lot of times Goodreads will monitor if they think you know somebody and it's like a personal, they'll take it down, but it's still there to this day. And I probably should screenshot it in case it ever does get taken down, but it's so beautiful, and it was surprising. But like you said, he it's an apology, but there's also a review towards the end. So,
Well, and I wonder too if him seeing your courage in being able to finally feel that, okay, I can discuss and share my journey so that this somehow has an impact and will have an impact on other families, other children. If that also gave him the courage to say, "Mom, I see you, and I actually want you to know that I made some missteps myself." I think I loved how you talked about the ability to feel seen by characters in books. And I think nowadays, the more that kids have access to technology and we're so quick to want like instant gratification and things of that nature, how when we do feel connected to a character in a book, that's what like draws us in, and that's what gives us another opportunity to feel seen. I felt that way. Well, I'll never forget when I had my 7th grade language arts teacher. She was Jamaican, and she was a spitfire of a Jamaican lady. Still remember her to this day, but she handed me West Side Story, and that was the first time that I felt, oh, I can connect with these characters. There's, Puerto Rican women and, Latina women being represented in this book. So similar to that experience, for you, I can understand the value of having books that tailor to communities, and not just specific communities, but other individuals who may not have those experiences, but say, hey, this is someone that has the ability and does take up space and doesn't take away from yours. I had a question I wanted to ask you, especially around as we talk about the book banning era that we are in, and how it is becoming potentially more challenging for students to sometimes, and not just kids that are elementary age, but any age, to have exposure to books that make them feel seen, characters that have experiences similar to them. How can parents and educators foster an environment where children feel safe and encouraged, to question assumptions or to challenge the status quo or things of that nature with some of the things that are happening currently in our climate?
That's a tricky question, because I think really it just boils down to making sure your kids know that their voice matters even in this specific issue. So if we're successful or we're not successful isn't even always the point, right? It's about, I have a right to speak up, so I'm going to speak up, and showing them that there's a way to speak up, whether that's going to a school board meeting or whatever it might be. But there are, unfortunately, books that randomly disappear from libraries. It happened in mine. I felt I was incredibly supported by my principal, and I felt at the time, I left that job 2 years ago because of a book challenge that kind of just pushed me over the edge a little bit, unfortunately. But being accused of having porn in a high school library is, it can messes with your head for sure. And because I would never do that. But what is that definition? And even though we had policies in place for years, and my principal supported every time a book was challenged, it always seemed like it was my school. And I think that's because, being an author, I knew the current market. I knew that new books come out on Tuesdays, and I was constantly on Tuesdays adding to my future purchase list, right? And just saving it in the cart until the money was there. And so my library was very current, in terms of the age of collection. And so a lot of these books that were being challenged were newer titles, and my library always happened to have them. And it started to feel a little bit personal on just that level, until it became really personal, social media and people saying, well, that librarian at that school. And even though my name wasn't used, people knew that was me, and they know that I write for kids. And so it was starting to blur these lines between, well, she's an author, The policies change. They're very fluid in the state of Florida right now. We seem to have something that will take place for a year, and then they will work to change it again. And so, right now, what the system that's in place, it isn't perfect. People are banding together every day, but what can kids do? Like, I think it's important for kids to see that their parents are speaking up, and they too can speak up. And that's, bottom line right there. I was not the mom that wanted my kids reading explicit things, but that should be my say, and not somebody else's to take those books away. I didn't mind that those books were there. It's just not something I would have wanted my kids to necessarily read. And so, yeah, it's just free access. It's a right. It's a right that we have here in the United States.
Do you think that parents struggle with trying to figure out ways now, with the way society is, to help kids feel safe around these issues, around what they read, what they do? And I bring this up because, like, sometimes, I get to engage with different people all the time, right? Parents can ask questions, community members, and those things, and I watch them in this struggle, right? Like, what I thought a long time ago, which was my parents were very black and white. They're like, this is this and this is that. Now you're living this much more fluid and nimble type of what's right, what's wrong, what's this, what's that, and then you're watching everything you say. There's this whole context around everything, and I watch that even with interpretation of whether it's books or something that's read or some of the things like. I mean, do you feel like what would be the thing you can tell parents or families now, like, I guess to encourage them, like, here's things you should be thinking about, or, because I mean, I feel like if I was in this space by now, I'd be very scared or confused on what to do, because it's just like, you don't know what's right or wrong anymore.
Right. And I think that that's different for everyone, right? So my measuring stick is different than the next person's measuring stick. And if it's going to come down to one simple solution in terms of parents and their own children, I would honestly say the only thing we can really do is give them the gift of time, right? So taking the time to do your homework about that particular title. If your kids like, I really want to read this book, everybody's reading this book. So do your homework as a parent and find out about the book. And I don't honestly think there would have been any book my own kids could have brought home that I would have told them they can't read if they really wanted to, but we certainly would have been having discussions. I would have been reading the same book, at a different time, or like on my own while they're reading, and then having those discussions. And I kind of tend to believe that a lot of the fear comes from the uncertainty. And when you really sit down and read a book, there's a lot less to be afraid of. So we are caught up in this media storm of this book is bad, this book is bad. But again, those measuring sticks are different. So read the book and talk to your child. But I understand parents are stretched, they're busy, they're, just trying to make ends meet, get dinner on the table, out the door to sports or whatever it is. But I really think making the time, instead of telling your kid you can't read that, or telling the librarian you need to remove this book, it shouldn't be here. Once you read the book, I feel like so many of those fears dissipate. If people are like, oh, that wasn't really that bad. Or I can at least address this concern with my kid.
Well, and I also think it's interesting because our kids are exposed to so many things, not solely in just books, right? I mean, the access to social media, discussions they just have as kids, and wonderings and curiosities, and or things they may see at the park or at home or at the movies. Or so I always just thought it was very interesting that it got to this place with literature, because children are seeing so many things, and there's lots of unlearning to do there with just what they're seeing outside of a physical book. So I just always thought it was very like, it's either this or it's that, and it's not quite as easy as I think as what Carrie was saying. I have another curiosity about your time in the classroom as a social studies teacher, and even just working as like a media specialist. And again, the podcast is about unlearning and our unlimited. what are some things that during your time as a classroom teacher and as a media specialist that you also feel have changed for you and you've also kind of worked to unlearn, or that you feel that we still have to unlearn as educators?
Possibly that the newest people on the totem pole don't have a right to speak up at meetings or to voice their opinion, whatever it might be. Because I think some of the younger ones tend to have the most innovative ideas. And so we shouldn't be stuck in our ways. Like, let's listen to this, especially with, AI coming and all of this. It's not going to go away. So how do we deal with that? And even myself, as I get older with technology, it's easier for me to say to my son, who is, 25 now, hey, can you like come connect this for me or figure this remote out? Like, just do it for me because I don't want to
Sounds like
invest.
my mom too.
Yeah. So, making sure that all of those newcomers feel like they're just as important as the person that's, been there for 30 plus years in the system.
Well, you think about I'm going to pivot a little bit because I'm going to ask you the same question, but just in a different lens. So, like, when you think about we worked in school systems, right? Similar to Tatiana, been in all these levels in a school system, and you see different things at different times and different moments because your experience is different and you're exposed to different things at different levels, right? And so, I think I was just thinking of where do you think schools has started to either get this wrong, right? Or they're really not thinking through how to logically address this issue of
How do they innovate?
innovation, reading good text. I mean, those type of things. Because when you talk to certain people, I've rarely, and I hate to say this, and I think I'm at fault too. I've rarely, Carrie, ever seen them bring in a media specialist or someone who actually is the one that probably knows more of the books and the entire system into a conversation about better reading, right? Or what are the types of things you should read. And, I was sharing this with Tatiana, I believe that people closest to the system can help you solve the problem faster than people further from the system, but they have 50 million opinions about how to do this, right? Or this test is going to resolve this. And you're like, they still can't read, right? Or they can't comprehend. And you hear a superintendent or whatever their position is in these spaces, and you're trying to figure out where are we getting it
The problem
wrong?
with the reading is that we're so caught up in testing and doing this that there's really not that much reading for fun going on anymore. And if we could get back to that, I think it would change things significantly across the education board in all departments, right? And I firmly believe that I see kids that come in, so I'll use the example of nonfiction, right? So a kid once said to, or actually, I'm sorry, it was another media specialist once said to me that the nonfiction section is where books go to die.
Wow.
And I thought that was really interesting.
wow.
So I was part of this study done with another author, and she was pushing media specialists across the country to try to gather some very informal data. And it was all centered around nonfiction because the number of kids at the elementary level reading nonfiction, those numbers were tremendous. They wanted to know about the animals and they wanted to know about all of these things. And then you get to high school and the circulation numbers are really low. And so what does that change? And so just the kids aren't reading for fun anymore. If you're picking up a nonfiction book in a high school library, it's most likely because you have a project due. And it's not being done for fun. And so I was really big into displays. I love doing media displays. You should see I'm doing floor to ceiling displays on any theme all year round. Love it so much. But making the books accessible, making it look fun, running contests. So we just have to get back to reading for fun, letting those kids read what they want to read and making it fun. So the AR testing and all of that, I'm glad to see that a lot of it is going away. because even my own kids hated it. I remember them being in school and reading a book and then having to go to school the next day and take a test. And the test anxiety is real. Like, my kid read the book, they loved the book, we talked about the book, but how are they going to pass this test on a book when they're just so anxious? And we're creating these anxious little humans that it's just, it's distressing to me.
What was the thing? Tatiana said something, I think, earlier when we came. You said,
Yes, there's a quote that says that the system is created to get the results that the system is built for, right? And I would agree that unfortunately we have taken the pleasure out of reading for children, and it's become very, kind of just like, you read this thing, eventually you're going to have to take a test on this thing. So then, you're not even enjoying the thing that you're reading because you're stressed about the fact that you got to take a test on the thing later on. So we have completely just taken, and I shouldn't say completely, that may be a bit much, but there has been a removal of the just sit to read and enjoy something and learn something, but there isn't something at the end that you're going to be held accountable for. Like, you're just doing it because it's fun.
Or even making it fun. So on my website, I try to make it easy for teachers if they're going to use my books. I have really fun extension activities that they can use for my books. And those are, things to get kids excited about it. It's not a test. I do have discussion questions, author note, and all of that, but I make sure that I provide the extension activities so that, one, it's easier for teachers, but two, it gives the kids something fun to do and it's not a test or an essay.
what do you think about, Kerry, this transition now from like moving away from actual books to like reading something on a tablet or something like that, right? I think.
Oh, Carrie, I do love my Kindle. I can't lie about that. That thing is portable and lovely.
Yeah, I don't see why anyone should be judgy about how someone's choosing to read. I don't care how you read, just read. If it's better on a Kindle or a tablet because you can load 30 books for your vacation instead of lugging 30 books, absolutely. Yeah, there's no right or wrong. I'm obsessed now that I do have the implant on just one side. I am obsessed because I can now listen to audiobooks, which I've never been able to do in my life. I constantly have one going and people are talking to me. I'm like, wait, I got to turn my, yeah, there's no right or wrong way to listen. And again, I would play the first chapter of on like a random audiobook every Friday in my media center before school, and kids would be like, because they probably thought like I did that it was monochromatic, like one person just talking like that, and the voices of these audiobooks are incredible. If you've never listened to one, I highly encourage it. I show them how they can get them for free from the library on their phones. Like, yeah, audiobooks are amazing. The kids are like, wow, that was so good. Where do I get that book? I'm like, come here, I'll show you how. Come here.
Well, I think that's also true, as we're also, if we talk about kids wanting to get them back into reading for pleasure, and if you have a child that's not particularly there yet, giving them access to a book, but through another modality, and i.e. an audiobook, can really be a game changer for a kid. I recall one of my favorite times growing up in school was when my teacher read to me, because that's how I also recalled, oh, like, characters sound different. They don't all talk the same, so as I'm reading, even now when I read to my niece and my nephew, I, want to infuse like different voices. I think that also makes it exciting and a better, reading experience for them.
And I credit my fourth grade teacher with me being an author, not because she taught me to write or made me fall in love with writing. She made me fall in love with stories because she did. And her name's Miss Terlowski. Shout out. I finally got to reconnect with her in person just like 3 or 4 months ago. But she read to us every single day. And it wasn't if we were good for the day or if we had enough time. She made time, right? And it was Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. Loved it. Her voices were amazing. And I fell in love with stories. And, look at me now. Again, I never thought I would be here.
Yeah.
Well, what is if you had to give in terms of now, just in terms of like being unlimited to the decision makers that help influence these conditions in schools,
Yes.
what would be your advice to them right now? Like, hey guys, like here's the conditions you should be thinking about.
So
I
that
would
we
say
can
be
get
brave.
kids back to good places.
Huh?
Be brave, because I don't think they're being brave. I think everybody's running in fear. I don't think they're reading these books on their own to be making the decisions. And it's just a collective fear. It's easier to say, we'll remove them and somebody can review them later. And no, that was never the policy. For years, the policy was if someone challenges a book, the book stays on the shelf until, the committee has made a decision or whatever. So they just need to be brave. Everyone's running scared right now. Take a
Right.
step back, take a breath, and be brave and really think about this, because it's a violation of the Constitution. I mean, we have a right to have these books, and no one's indoctrinating children. No one wants that for kids. The media specialists I know, I can only speak to that. No one is out there trying to indoctrinate a child.
Mhm. Well, I mean, what is this fear? Like, I still can't wrap my head around it because like, I remember as an administrator in schools, I had a parent one time that says, well, I want to make sure, my kid is not exposed to this, and this. And I asked remember asking the mom, I said, well, mom, does the kid have Instagram? She's like, yeah, she has Instagram. I said, well, they're probably talking to people already around certain things that you have no clue. She said, well, why that's not possible. So I said, well, so she showed me the kid's cell phone. And I get on the cell phone. I was like, yeah, look at this, and showed them like, and she's looking like, wait a minute, they've been having conversations all over the place. I was like, yeah, there's more exposure happening than
Yeah.
you
So
think.
what's the fear?
So like, as much as you may think that you are guarding children, you should really be thinking more around, I think, trying to show them what's good and right. And you build these conditions around them so they know how to manage and deal with the world, because technology has taken this thing to a whole nother planet that, that I don't know if everyone is catching up fast enough, quite frankly. And even in schools, like, we talk about AI and all that, like there's so much stuff that kids are learning, not just only in the classroom, but in their environments, that's accelerating so fast that I think helping them to read and learn about different type of aspects of things actually helps them to have a much stronger
I could not
foundation.
agree with you more. So why are we so scared to let them do that? That's the part I can't wrap my head around. And the conclusion that I might come to in discussing, XYZ with my kid might be a different conclusion than you come to with your family. And that's perfectly okay as well. But why are we so afraid to have the conversations, And I remember, because my cousins are Armenian, and the Armenian genocide was just not acknowledged for so long. And then when President Biden, I believe it was President Biden, actually did acknowledge and just say, this happened. This was this great, terrible thing. The relief that came to their family just in that simple statement, because these kids are feeling bad about what their ancestors did. Well, why can't we just talk about this was a really bad thing and it happened and we're so sorry. And our job is to just make sure this doesn't happen again and move on. Because I can't say for sure that it would be that simple, but isn't that what we're supposed to do? The critical
Right.
thinking and the talking and the challenging and letting these kids figure the world out, having those discussions and coming to conclusions. I mean, this is all things we want as educators, right? Every level of critical thinking right there. And so I don't understand why we're so nervous or scared to do those things.
Well, let me ask this final question, and then I also want you to be able to share your books and stuff with our community. What should we be unlimited about in education, according to Carrie?
Yeah. Bravery is one thing for sure. What else
I
would
do
you
think
say?
I think everything comes down to bravery, because we're just in these unprecedented times right now, and no one. I think if anyone's like me, you're on top of all of it. You're feeling exhausted, right? It's exhausting, and so yeah, just being brave, taking a breath, take a step back, and really think it through before you're making these important decisions.
What do you think, Tatiana?
For me, I think what we need to be unlimited about in education right now is twofold. I think our ability to pivot, because there is something about what we're doing that's not quite hitting the mark, and it's definitely not hitting the mark for all kids. So there is value in even us as adults, our power to being able to pivot. Carrie, you did it as, social studies teacher, and then you pivoted to, your role as media specialist, and then now as an author. And through that journey as an author, I pivoted to as an educator and working in the nonprofit sector, you pivoting in all different ways in your professional career. So I think for education, I would say one is we got to tap into the ability to pivot. And secondly, for me, I would say we really have to tap into the voices of kids a lot more in the educational landscape. We have long surpassed the days of just come to school, sit and get and do what you're told. We know that kiddos are not like that anymore. So they have voices and they have agency, and we should use that to have positive impact in our world.
Well, Kerry, we appreciate you coming on onto the podcast. Well, let's share with a little bit. I want you share your books and anything.
Oh yes, and you have an
and
exciting
your
book
website.
coming out next year.
Yeah. I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about your upcoming work.
Yeah, so I have 3 out right now. They're all considered middle grade, which would be 4th grade through 8th. And they are
I have a kid
vastly
that's going to
different
be reading one of
topics.
your books.
I'm sorry?
I have one that's going to be reading one of your books.
Awesome. So Just a Drop of Water was my first one. It's about 9/11 and 2 boys, how their friendship is tested in the wake of 9/11. And that one is still being used. If it's been out, it'll be 11 years this year. And I'm so proud because it is still doing very well, being used in schools across the country. I do a lot of speaking for that book. And then Hear Me, which we spoke about earlier, and the girl losing her hearing, and Make a Little Wave was my newest one. I think you can see them up here above me. So Make a Little Wave
That's awesome.
super cool because my daughter, marine biologist, her specialty is sharks. And so I was terrified of sharks before she started taking us diving and educating us. And I mean, now I'll swim with sharks. And, not to say we don't fear them because they're creatures, they're animals, and every animal is unpredictable. But for the most part, learning about them takes that fear away. And that goes right back to what we were talking about earlier, right? When you take out that fear, when you take the time to think about something or educate yourself, it's a lot less scary. And so the same goes for the sharks. And I'm really proud because she got to write the scientific note in the back of that book.
That's awesome.
Yeah, super cool to do that with her. And so I have one coming out in March with Little Brown. It's called The Gallaudet 11, the story of NASA's deaf bioastronauts. And it's the true story of 11 deaf men from Gallaudet University who helped America win the space race. And no one really knows their story, which is unfortunate. And 4 of them are still alive. 3 of them I'm in pretty regular contact with. And they are so thrilled that finally people are going to know about their 10-year work with NASA. Basically, certain deaf people are immune to motion sickness. And these men all happened to be, so they were eligible to work with NASA for those 10 years. And really, it was how can we create spacesuits or space capsules or whatever it is needed to prevent these astronauts from getting sick when they're piloting these, $1 million spacecrafts. But even modern day things like Dramamine or anyone who gets motion sick, if you're taking something, a lot of that is based on the research from these guys. So I've just seen the final artwork. In fact, right before we started the podcast, I got another email from my editor there with the final internal artwork, which I haven't looked at yet because we were about to start.
Oh,
So
well, I know you are giddy for this right now, but yes, you are ready to see that artwork. Congratulations.
very excited. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie. We're really excited. Thank you so much for coming on. And we wanted to say, continue to do the work. If there's anyone that is interested in Kerry's work, let us know. We can, Kerry, is there any way they can contact you if they're interested in getting you to come to speak or anything like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So my website has all of that information and testimonials from other school visits, pictures, all of that stuff. And being an educator, it's definitely helpful when you're with in the student capacity, managing those crowds or whatever it might be. But yeah, everything's on my website, which is just my name, CarrieO'MalleySarah.com.
Nice.
It was a pleasure to chat with you today. We absolutely loved it. Again, as from one South Floridian to another, it has been a joy to chat with you.
So nice to meet you.
Well, we thank you so much for coming on. And for all you folks watching back home, if you want to support our channel, please like and subscribe our YouTube channel. And then let us know if there's any questions or topics or anything like that. Please let us know, put in the comments, and we're really excited. And until next time, we hope you stay unlearned and unlimited.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
Bye.
Bye.
Unlearning unlimited. Unlearning unlimited. Hey.